Good evening, Minister and staff, and you're welcome. I suppose one of the issues that comes up in most of our constituency office on a regular basis is the CDNTs and the fact that progressive disabilities is not delivering. And as you said there, I mean, there are, or it was identified in the report, and you acknowledge yourself that there's significant difficulties. You say the model of PDS is seen as the most effective, so have you looked at other models, or is there a possibility of tweaking that, or have you looked at what's happening in other countries? Because, you know, at the moment it's not working. Maybe if it properly and fully staffed it would be. Probably the biggest issue is the length of time the AON is taken, and I know we had a discussion earlier in the autism group, and I was just thinking about it since, like, who determines how long an assessment of need should be? I mean, like, as you say, some of them done in the private sector are only taking about 3 hours, and that they've been accepted by CDNTs in schools. If that's the case, is there need for this 29 to 40 hour assessment? Maybe there is in some cases, but maybe not. Then I suppose to look at again as who is actually doing the assessments so that we can free up more therapists. There's a need to incentivise therapists into the CDNTs. Many of them are opting to go into the private sector, and that's just it's ending up being a vicious circle where the HSE are now paying private therapists to carry out services or to carry out assessments when they actually should be working in the public sector. So I suppose it's to look at incentivising. I mean, you said there about pay increases for Section 39 staff. I'm just wondering where that's at, because again, there's still quite a significant pay disparity between Section 39 and Section 38 or HSE. And until that is actually properly and fully addressed, I don't think there's going to be an end to that problem of staff leaving services, disability services, whether it's CDNTs or adult services. I see the Irish Wheelchair Association in Cavan is still not operating as it should be because of staff. And then the 6 assessment hubs, just who are the staff in those? I mean, are they again pulling from the same agencies, from primary care and from the CDNTs? Or, you know, because we're not going to solve a problem if we're pulling staff from one sector to another. And also I think the links with education have to be strengthened, because the reason for so many assessment of needs at the moment is to get access to an appropriate school placement, and schools are insisting on them. So it's not always that the assessment of need is needed, or a diagnosis, I should say, is needed even for services. It's needed to get into a school. So I think there has to be a better working relationship between the HSE and between the community supports and schools. Just to quickly mention the other issues, because respite is still a huge issue. My own constituency, as you know, Minister, there's only one adult respite centre in Monaghan. There's one for children and adults in Cavan and nothing else. So we need a second one in Monaghan for children, and if possible a second one in Cavan as well. And I suppose the transport issue as well is yeah, I mean, the disabled driver disabled passenger scheme is still too stringent, and I'm just wondering, I know you were chairing a transport group and there was a report being done into that. I'm just seeing, is anything coming from that? Are there any new models, or, you know, to replace the mobility allowance and the grants and so on? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Deputy Tully. All right, you've covered an awful lot on that, and I'm going to see where I'm going to. So there's no doubt that the system with the CDNTs is not working. Like, it's not, because they're not fully staffed. And when you don't have a fully functioning model, it's very hard to say what good looks like, because you're only guessing what good could look like. But one is to say that could we incentivise therapists more to come into it? I actually think we've such a crisis within the CDNTs at the moment, and I would have said this earlier on at the Autism All-Party Committee meeting, that we need to look at innovative ways to support the CDNTs. And I would say maybe we need to look at redeploying from primary care. Maybe we need to look at some of the management of it, for the simple reason being is that the teams there are working as hard as they can in some cases. They're working really, really difficult, challenging times. And at the same time, I would also say, and I have looked for funding before and I will continue to look for, that when I came into post, it was really like that the HSE had too much in management, but we didn't have too much in our CDNT teams. We don't have enough people that are answering the phones or communicating so the therapist can do what the therapist can do. It's very difficult to be a therapist on a CDNT that has only 50% staff. It's very difficult to be able to keep on top of the number of phone calls, the number of emails. But I do think there's ways and means that we should be able to do that better. And actually, I do believe that there's a need for that admin piece. I also believe that there's a way within the broader family of HSE of supporting our CDNTs. And that shouldn't mean that primary care or the acutes shouldn't be able to deploy from their management clinical space of 1 day a week to support us in delivering therapeutic interventions. I think that's another way. You talk about incentives. If it's a monetary incentive, perhaps, absolutely, we should be looking at it. It's a difficult role to make it more attractive. But I do think that the pay increases and the Section 38s, the Section 39s on the HSE, like we saw how fraught that was last year. And I have to acknowledge, and I heard you asking questions last night of the Minister for Public Expenditure in relation to staff still haven't received their full wages yet. And I only recently asked Bernard O'Regan as to how many have completed. Has that happened? And I was shocked to hear only 500 out of the 1,100 odd organisations had their COSI forms returned. Like, it's a very simplified form, the COSI. There's actually a telephone line to help the organisation to actually fill it out. But there's no reason why staff should not be getting the increases that was allocated last year at the very minimum, Deputy, because that is already signed off on. Whatever about the negotiations that start into place now, but last year's pay negotiations should be done. And I actually cannot understand why they are not paid out at this stage, Deputy. In relation to the 6 assessment hubs, they are actually have not just people from disabilities. There's people from primary care also sitting on those. But the most important person on the assessment hubs is the assessment officer. And where you have a full cohort of the hubs with the assessment officer on it, the files are processing through an awful lot quicker. And I can see that when we were down an assessment officer from 3 to 2, and then we went from 3 to 1 at one stage in Donegal. The files weren't going through quick enough, and that, when I say Donegal, that is CHO1, which is your own area. But when we are back up, we've 2 out of the 3 there now, and we hit the third assessment officer. The files move quicker, the assessments are done quicker, and the families are put on a pathway an awful lot quicker. The assessment officer is key. They come with an awful lot of skills. You are so right in relation to the links in education, because a lot of our referrals that are coming in for assessment of needs are coming through the pathway of education. And at the same time, and they are also coming from primary care. I don't want to lay it all with actually education, but there is a good cohort coming in from education. And in CHO3, which is the Clare area, the Clare North Tipperary Limerick area, they ran a pilot where the chief officer led it out, where there was a working relationship done between the schools and the CDNTs, and actually held workshops with the parents and information evenings on it, whereas they were building up resources and actually an understanding, and it has proved to be incredibly, really worthwhile project. It should be stood up everywhere. In relation to Cavan, I met with the IWA only last Friday around Cavan, and the problem we have in Cavan, it's to do with drivers and ensuring that the staff are there. I think there's a whole conversation there, not just in Cavan, but right around the country with the IWA, that there's a need for funding, specifically in the transport element side of things. And where we don't have good links in rural areas, we don't have a local link everywhere or anything else like that. We need to be able to work with the likes of the Irish IWA, who are solely dependent, or a lot dependent on the CE scheme for ensuring that they have a delivery of service there. So we need to actually, when the people move off the schemes, that there is capacity built in to put a person in place for it. Respite, absolutely, it's still a priority in your area, absolutely. We've had long conversations about it. It's still not gone off the agenda. And in relation to the working group, I'm going to let Niall come in on that.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks, Chair. Deputy, as you said yourself, the transport work has been led by work done under the NDIS, the Transport 104 Working Group. That produced its report, and the Department of Taoiseach is chairing a senior officials group taking that work forward. And that's met a couple of times. We're also looking at transport as a dedicated pillar in the National Disability Strategy, which will be the CRPD implementation plan. And that's looking at a couple of strands. One is a dedicated piece of work around the disabled drivers and passengers scheme, where I think there's a recognised need to change the approach there. And the other is a piece of work around looking at assessments for transport supports. So we've been engaging as part of that process, which is being managed by Taoiseachs, and we've also worked very closely with the Department of Taoiseach on the transport pillar for the NDS itself. And we hope to unveil, as part of the publication for that strategy then, a pillar's worth of work looking at transport supports, from incentivising and doing better in terms of access to public transport, to a whole of journey approach to people for whom public transport may not be an option, or you might need additional supports to get to and from public transport. So there's a lot of work going on there, and we'd hope that the NDS pillar would set out what that looks like over the next 6 years.